I pressed charges for my sexual assault, and the courtroom laughed. That's the truth in its ugliest shape, and no matter how many years pass, no matter how many surgeries I perform or lives I put back together in sterile white operating rooms, that echo follows me. People think laughter is harmless, but when it comes at the wrong moment, it can wound deeper than any scalpel. I was a doctor, respected, published, the kind who walked into a hospital and had colleagues nod in acknowledgement of my skill. I had built a life of precision and control, and in one night, that control was taken from me in the worst way possible. By a man I trusted, in a place meant to celebrate knowledge and collaboration. It happened at a medical conference, a 3-day gathering of specialists in Boston. I was presenting a paper on post-op infection rates and enjoying the kind of validation that comes from applause in a crowded hall. The nights were for dinners, wine, and the sort of half-boring, half-pretentious conversations doctors indulge in when they're away from home. That second night, after too many drinks, I followed a colleague, someone I admired, someone I'd worked with on research, back to his hotel room to continue the discussion. It wasn't unusual. Conferences blur boundaries, and I thought nothing of it. I should have. The details are burned into me, not because I want them, but because memory doesn't give choices. He shut the door, poured another drink, leaned closer than necessary, and before I could register what was happening, his hand was on me, his weight pressing me against the desk. My voice froze. I wasn't prepared. Not for this. Not from him. People think men will fight, will punch, will roar, but shock steals muscles faster than anesthesia. I remember thinking, absurdly, this can't be happening to me, not me, but it was. The morning after, I showered 3 times, scrubbed until my skin burned, stared at myself in the mirror until I didn't recognize the man looking back. I considered doing nothing. I considered locking it away, telling myself I had imagined it, or that it didn't matter, or that my career was too valuable to risk. But when I stood to give my next talk, my voice shook, and when colleagues asked what was wrong, my throat closed up. I couldn't live in silence. Not again. Not this time. So I went to the police. The officer behind the desk didn't even hide his smirk. "You're saying another man did this to you?" His tone carried the weight of a joke no one needed to finish. He asked why I didn't fight back, why I didn't scream, why I went to the room in the first place. Each question felt less like an inquiry and more like a verdict. Still, I pressed charges. I wrote a statement, hands shaking. I thought the law would help. That was the first time I was wrong. Filing the report was supposed to be the hardest part, but the real weight came after. I learned quickly that the system doesn't know what to do with men like me. The detective assigned to my case, a man with a thick neck and eyes that looked bored the moment I sat down, read my statement like it was a script he didn't want to perform. He asked me 3 times if I was sure I hadn't misread the signals. Each time I repeated that no, there had been no signals, only force. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and promised to look into it. I left the precinct with a thin slip of paper and the sour knowledge that my words carried no gravity. Back at the hospital, whispers had already started. Conferences breed gossip, and people noticed when I skipped a dinner, when I didn't linger at the bar, when I looked pale at morning rounds. Medicine is a field obsessed with control, with strength, with long hours that make you feel invincible. Vulnerability doesn't fit into that narrative. When I walked into the operating theater, I felt eyes on me, colleagues measuring my silence, wondering if the rumors they'd heard were true. The prosecutor's office called me 2 weeks later. The assistant DA, a woman named Keller, explained my case would be challenging. She said juries don't like he said cases. She said my professional standing could cut both ways. I looked credible, yes. But the defense would argue I was protecting my reputation, fabricating to cover a consensual encounter. She asked if I had bruises. I said no. She asked if I had witnesses. I said no. Her silence stretched long enough for me to hear what she was thinking. Then she said, "We'll move forward, but you need to prepare yourself. It won't be easy." Easy was never the word. The weeks dragged into months. I kept performing surgeries, stitching arteries, setting bones, saving lives, while mine felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. At night, I replayed the moment at the hotel. The way his hand closed around my wrist, the way my body betrayed me by freezing instead of fighting. I wondered if maybe the cop was right. Maybe Keller was right. Maybe I should have pushed harder, shouted louder, done something different. Shame is an echo chamber, and once you're in it, every sound confirms the worst things you already believe. The pretrial hearing was the first time I saw him again. My assailant walked into the courtroom with his lawyer, calm, pressed suit, hair neat as ever. He smiled at someone in the gallery as though this were a social engagement, not a felony. His lawyer argued dismissal, said my accusations were absurd, that there was no evidence, no injury, nothing but a man regretting a consensual night. I sat there, jaw clenched, while the judge considered. Then, to my relief, She denied the motion. There would be a trial. But as I left that day, a group of people near the courthouse steps looked at me and laughed. Not a loud laugh, not mocking in words, just the kind of low, cruel chuckle that says, "We don't believe you. We never will." It burned more than the gavel's indifference. That night I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't just fighting him. I was fighting everyone's idea of what a man should be. And I wasn't sure I was strong enough to win. The trial opened on a gray morning, the kind of weather that makes everything feel like it's already decided. I walked into that courtroom with my suit pressed, my hands steady, but my stomach felt like I'd swallowed stones. The judge introduced the case. The jury filed in, and my name became something whispered between strangers, as though it were no longer mine but public property. The prosecutor outlined the charges: sexual assault, abuse of trust. She spoke with conviction, but even from where I sat I could feel the jury's doubt. They glanced at me, then at him, weighing two men in their minds, trying to decide who looked more believable. He sat there like a man at a luncheon, calm and unconcerned, as if this was beneath him. When I took the stand, the questions began like scalpels. Sharp, precise, meant to cut. Keller guided me gently through the events. What happened that night, how I felt, why I reported. I told the truth, each word dragging out of me like a confession. The courtroom was silent, but not supportive. It was the silence of people straining to believe and failing. Then came the defense. His attorney, a man with a shark smile, leaned forward and asked, "Doctor, you're a trained surgeon, are you not? You know anatomy, strength, control. How is it that you couldn't fight back?" The jury shifted in their seats. I tried to answer, to explain the paralysis of shock, but the attorney cut me off. "Isn't it true you went to his room willingly? That you accepted a drink? That you didn't cry out? Didn't flee? Didn't tell anyone until the next day?" Each question was a dagger, each pause an invitation for the jury to fill in the worst. And then it happened, a ripple of laughter. Not loud, not from everyone, but enough. A juror coughed to cover it. Someone in the gallery chuckled. The sound hit me harder than any cross-examination. I froze, hearing it echo, a confirmation of every fear I had carried since that night. I forced myself to answer, voice cracking. "Shock doesn't follow logic. You can't understand unless it happens to you." But my words felt small against their laughter. Just when I thought the trial was slipping beyond saving, Keller called her last witness. A man I didn't recognize walked nervously to the stand, adjusting his glasses with shaking fingers. He introduced himself as Dr. Mark Delaney, another surgeon, one I'd seen in passing at conferences but never spoken to. His testimony cracked the case open. He told the jury about his own encounters with my assailant, the inappropriate touches, the cornered conversations, the night at another conference when he barely escaped a hotel room himself. He admitted he never reported it, out of fear, out of shame. His voice shook, but he spoke anyway. For a moment, the courtroom stilled. My assailant's composure faltered. The defense scrambled, objected, claimed irrelevance. But the judge allowed it. And for the first time, I felt the tide shift. Yet as I looked at Mark, I saw the same thing I felt. Humiliation. He too was exposing himself to a system eager to dismiss him. The jury listened, but their eyes still carried that doubt, that unspoken question. How can men be victims? By the time closing arguments ended, I knew the verdict would be a coin toss. But as I walked out of that courtroom, I also knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. When the verdict came, I sat rigid in my chair. The foreman's voice was steady. "We find the defendant guilty." Relief crashed over me, almost drowning out what came next. Sentenced to 18 months, suspended after 6, probation thereafter. A slap on the wrist. A crime acknowledged but not punished in any way that mattered. My attacker smirked as though he had won anyway. People patted my back as if I should be grateful. Keller told me it was rare to win at all in cases like mine. "Take the victory," she said, but it tasted hollow. How could I celebrate when the sentence told every man in the room that my pain was worth half a year behind bars? After court, I walked outside into the sunlight. Reporters called my name, asking for a statement. Behind them, I heard it again. That laugh. A stranger's chuckle, sharp and dismissive, as if the trial had been entertainment. I froze, the echo rushing back. For a heartbeat, I felt myself sink, my body dragging me back into that hotel room. Then I turned, looked the man in the eye, and kept walking. Life didn't reset. At the hospital, colleagues avoided me, afraid my story might stick to them like contagion. Some patients switched doctors. My parents never said the word assault out loud, only asked if I was moving on. But some things did change. Mark Delaney and I stayed in touch. We built a quiet alliance, two men who had learned the cost of silence and decided never to pay it again. Slowly, others reached out too. Whispers from colleagues, emails from strangers. Men who said, "Me too," but I never told anyone. The trial had taken more from me than it gave, but it gave me one thing worth everything: a voice. A voice that refused to be laughed away. I still hear the echoes sometimes, the chuckles, the cruel coughs that tried to turn my trauma into a joke. But I also hear something louder now. My own words. Words that carried into a courtroom, onto transcripts, into the record. Words that other men will find one day when they need to know they're not alone. I pressed charges for my assault and the courtroom laughed, but I didn't stop speaking. And if you're hearing this now, believe me, and believe the next man too.